This happened so long ago that some of the details are a bit fuzzy now. It wasn't like it happened yesterday, but I'll do my best to fill in the gaps with how I remember things. It was the last day of school, and I was in 4th grade. That was the final year at our elementary school where parents had to pick up their kids. In 5th grade, we were allowed to walk home on our own. My mom usually picked me up on the last day of school. But this time, my friend Dennis and I had made plans to hang out afterward to celebrate the summer. Dennis wasn't in my class that year, but we had been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different hallway when it came time to go home. After school let out, we lined up, single file, and walked toward the exit door where we waited outside with our teacher, Miss Blue. I waited for Dennis's dad to show up through the crowd of parents pulling in and out of the parking lot. Then, I heard someone calling my name, "Dami Dami." I looked over and saw a man waving at me as he walked toward me. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was there to pick me up. I told Miss Blue that I was leaving with him. She asked where he was, so I pointed him out. He waved at her and Miss Blue told me I could go. I followed the man, and as we walked through the crowd, he spoke quickly, almost nervously, like he was a fast talker with a slight stutter. He was walking so fast that it was hard to keep up, especially with my backpack on. He explained that Dennis's dad was running late for work, so he was taking me home. When we got to his car, I finally noticed something that I hadn't thought of until then. Where was Dennis? Why wasn't he coming too? The man turned around and looked at me from the back seat. "Oh, Dennis is already home," he said, as though that was all there was to it. I didn't say anything, but I was starting to feel a bit uneasy. I was a shy kid, especially around people I didn't know, and I didn't always speak up when something seemed off. But this felt wrong. The man kept talking, asking about the sports I played, what we were learning in school, and telling stories about his own days in elementary school. I'd guess we were in the car for maybe 10 minutes, but in our small town, that felt like a long time. My house was only a 5-minute walk from school, and we were definitely driving through neighborhoods I didn't recognize. When we pulled up to his house, it seemed normal enough. He led me inside, shutting the door behind him and locked it. The place was dark, almost like it was night. I noticed that all the curtains were closed, and the only light came from a dim lamp in the corner. He smiled at me and said, "Dennis is downstairs playing video games. Wait here, I'll be right back." He disappeared into another room and I heard the sound of a door opening, followed by footsteps heading downstairs. That's when it hit me. I was in danger. I tried to quietly open the door to leave, but it was locked and I started to panic. Still, I kept hoping that Dennis would come up those stairs any second, but deep down, I knew that wasn't likely. I regretted stepping inside that house. I ran to the kitchen and found a phone mounted on the wall. I picked up the receiver, dialed 911, and whispered into the phone, "Please come, I've been kidnapped." They heard me, but I didn't say anything else. I hid the phone under a towel on the counter, still connected to the 911 operator. As I made my way back to the living room, I could hear the man's footsteps coming back up the stairs. He called my name from upstairs. "Come on down. Dennis is waiting for you." There was a pause before he repeated my name. When I didn't answer, he came upstairs to find me. He asked if I was okay, and I could feel my heart racing. I felt sick to my stomach. I asked in a trembling voice if I could leave. That's when I saw the change in his face. His friendly smile dropped and I realized he wasn't pretending anymore. He came closer to me, acting gentle at first, until he grabbed my wrist hard and started dragging me toward the basement. I screamed and cried and he screamed back, "I'll let you go if you stop fighting." But I didn't stop. I kept resisting, even as he dragged me down the stairs. Halfway down, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. The basement was cold and unfinished, with a concrete floor and a single support beam in the middle. The only light came from a dim yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling. It felt like a place where kidnapped kids might end up. I heard him moving around upstairs for a while, but eventually he came back to the basement door, opened it, and called down. "Are you hungry?" I said no. I didn't want him to go into the kitchen and see that the phone was missing. He shut the door and locked it again. I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting in complete silence. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. 3 loud rings of the doorbell, followed by banging on the door. I stayed as quiet as I could until I heard the door opening, but I never heard the man's footsteps approaching. The banging continued. Then there was a loud crash, followed by multiple footsteps and shouting voices. That's when I started screaming for help. I banged on the door, calling out, and finally, I heard the door unlock. A police officer grabbed me and pulled me outside. There were at least 3 cop cars, and I had to tell everything to the officers as we waited for my parents. Inside, they were arresting the man and taking him away in handcuffs. That was the last time I ever saw him. When my mom arrived, she was crying. The whole school had already been notified, and the police had contacted Dennis's dad. They'd realized what had happened, and they were able to act quickly. A colleague of Dennis's dad got wind of the fact that Dennis's father would be picking us up from school on the last day. Seizing the chance, he did something utterly twisted. I have no idea how he found out what I looked like as I got older, and honestly, I never bothered to dig deeper into the details. I'd rather not dwell on it. My mom took me to therapy for months after the incident. Let's just say, my parents had some very harsh words for not double-checking that the person picking me up was someone I actually knew. If I hadn't thought to call the cops before he basically shoved me into that basement, I'm certain I wouldn't be here today. This happened about 17 years ago. For all I know, that man could be out of prison by now. It was the last day of junior year in high school. A lot of people skipped school that day or left early after lunch, and my friends and I were among the latter. It was a dark, stormy day, and most of our grade had originally planned to hit the beach for the last day of school. Of course, that plan was quickly scrapped because of the weather. So, my small group of close friends decided to make our own fun. There was this abandoned elementary school in town that had been unused for at least 10 years. The plan was to demolish it by the end of the year, so we figured we'd check it out before it was gone. We made the decision to break into the school and explore. There were no cameras around the building, and with the stormy weather, no one would be outside keeping an eye on the place. After lunch, we all piled into Eddie's car. He was the only one with a license. The school was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood off the beaten path. There was a back parking lot, shielded by overgrown bushes and trees on one side, with the walls of the school surrounding it on the other. It was the perfect spot to park and not get noticed. The school wasn't boarded up, just locked up. Eddie had a baseball bat in the trunk, and he pulled it out to smash one of the windows. Honestly, I was so nervous. Even with the pouring rain, I kept thinking someone from the houses over the fence would hear the crash. We all stood there, nervously laughing, as Eddie swung the bat into the window. After a few solid hits, the glass shattered, and he used the bat to knock away the jagged pieces still stuck in the frame. He waved us over, and one by one, we climbed through the broken window and into the school. My reasoning? The place was getting torn down anyway. What's a broken window? We were all inside the building now. The window we climbed through led into a classroom. The room still had a lot of things left behind: desks, chairs, and even some decorations on the walls. Judging by the decorations, it seemed like this was once a 4th or 5th grade classroom. It felt strange being in a space that used to be lively with kids learning, now reduced to a dark, cold, and abandoned shell. Dust coated everything, as if the room was just waiting for its final demolition. The occasional thunder and lightning outside only added to the eeriness of the moment. There was no electricity in the building. We figured the power had been shut off for years. We had expected that though, so we relied on the flashlights from our phones to find our way. Even without them, it wasn't completely dark. Despite the gloomy weather, a little light seeped in through cracks in the windows and doors. We moved through the hallways, exploring room after room. Each classroom we entered still had desks and chairs that hadn't been used for what looked like at least a decade. The 4 of us were together in one of the classrooms when we suddenly heard a noise echo from the hallway into the room. We froze, quickly switching off our lights. For a few seconds, lit only by a lightning flash, we stood still, listening. When nothing else happened, we shrugged it off as nothing and continued our exploration. As we walked from room to room, the sound of our wet shoes squeaking against the floor gave us away. Sneaking around wasn't an option. The entire school was falling apart, and it was obvious no one had been here in years. As we reached a corner in the hallway, I glanced back. Near the doorway of one of the classrooms, something seemed to be sticking out. I pointed it out to my friends, and we aimed our flashlights toward it. Just as the beams of light hit the doorway, whatever it was suddenly pulled back into the room. We all whispered a collective, "Oh!" and took off running down the hallway. We didn't stop until we reached another wing of the building, which seemed to be the kindergarten section. Before we could catch our breath, another sound echoed from the hallway behind us. That's when we realized we weren't alone. But who else could be here? The building was locked, and there was no power. Panicked, we ducked into the nearest classroom and quietly closed the door. It turned out to be a kindergarten room. We sat in silence, trying to avoid trouble. The sound of the heavy rain outside, combined with the frequent crashes of thunder, made the tension worse. Suddenly, the classroom door clicked. It slowly creaked open until it was fully ajar. We didn't see anyone in the doorway at first. The hallway was nearly pitch black. We stayed as quiet as we could, trying not to breathe too loudly. Then, out of the shadows, a shape emerged. It was a head. We all saw it. When the next flash of lightning lit up the room, we got a clear look. It wasn't just a shadow, it was someone's face staring right at us. I began apologizing on behalf of all of us, explaining that we were leaving. But the person standing in the doorway didn't budge. They just stood there, motionless, almost lifeless, peering into the classroom. Eddie broke the silence and asked, "Do you work here?" There was no response. Eddie, clearly unsettled by the situation, handed me the bat as he fumbled with one of the windows, trying to slide it open just enough for us to crawl through. He went out first, followed by our two friends, and I was the last to escape. Before climbing out, I glanced back one final time at the figure in the doorway. My heart raced as I scrambled through the window, terrified that at any moment I might hear them running toward me, grabbing at my legs. Once I was out, I sprinted to catch up with my friends who were already rushing back to Eddie's car. We piled in, drove off in a panic, and never looked back. The building was demolished later that year and replaced with a park. Luckily, we never got caught for breaking in. To this day, we still don't know if that person was some kind of worker or just a random stranger. Either way, their behavior was incredibly creepy. When I was a college freshman, I took a chemistry class that completely threw me for a loop. It was tough. The classroom had these group tables of 4, and I ended up sitting at a middle table on the far left side, all the way at the end. That's where I met Zach. Now, Zach was an interesting character. He gave off major Reddit moderator vibes. Picture this: about 5 feet 8 inches, a bit on the heavier side, and rocking a painfully patchy beard. But boy, did the guy know his chemistry. Honestly, he seemed like one of those people who just excelled in school, period. We started talking, not in a super friendly way, but more like the kind of chats you have when someone notices you're struggling. I was terrible at chemistry, so naturally I started asking him for help. He didn't seem to mind and actually went above and beyond, offering to do my homework and even letting me peek at his answers during tests. For the record, I never got even the tiniest hint of flirtation from Zach. He was way too awkward for that. Or maybe he just didn't know how to flirt face to face. Eventually, he asked for my number, saying it was for homework-related stuff. I gave it to him, of course. He'd practically saved my grade. Besides, he didn't give off any creepy vibes, just a kind of shy, socially awkward energy. Fast forward to the last day of class, and Zach completely caught me off guard. Out of nowhere, he asked me if I wanted to go on a date with him after class. Now, I have to be honest, Zach wasn't my type at all. There was zero physical attraction, and our personalities couldn't have been more different. But I appreciated all the help he'd given me, so I had to let him down as gently as possible. I told him a little white lie, saying I'd be heading to Miami for a couple of weeks and wouldn't be around. I figured that would give him enough time to lose interest. But Zach wasn't giving up so easily. He immediately asked, "What about when you get back?" Caught off guard, I kind of mumbled something like, "Yeah, maybe," hoping that would satisfy him. He nodded and replied with a painfully awkward, "Cool." And from that moment until the end of class, the air was thick with awkwardness. As soon as class ended, I bolted to my car and drove straight home. I was a commuter, not a dorm resident, so for me, that was officially the last time I'd see him. That same night, my friends, who also went to the same school, wanted to go out, so we hit the town. It was a perfect way to shake off the weird vibes from earlier that day. That night, while we were out on the town, I got a text from Zach. "When are you going to Miami?" I laughed and decided to tell my friends the whole story about him. I explained how he helped me ace my chemistry class but was now angling for a date. My friends, tipsy and playful, teased me, saying I should go on the date to be nice. I joked back, "Oh yeah, totally," with heavy sarcasm. I meant to reply to him later, but being drunk, I completely forgot. The next morning, I woke up to 2 more texts from him. The first was just question marks. The second sent a chill down my spine. "You're going to ignore me now that you don't need me anymore, right?" Feeling uneasy, I quickly typed out a reply. "Hey, sorry about that. I was packing. I'm leaving for Miami today." He responded almost immediately, "Okay." Of course, there was no Miami trip, but I assumed he'd never figure that out. Later that night, I went out again with my girlfriends, thinking the whole thing was behind me. As we laughed and danced, I suddenly got another text from Zach. This one made my blood run cold. "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." My hands went numb, and I almost dropped my drink. I showed my friends, who were just as freaked out as I was. I quickly replied, "What do you mean?" His response came just as fast. "Nothing. Forget it. I just don't like liars." I felt a wave of dread. Was he watching me? I scanned the bar, searching every shadowy corner for his face. He wasn't there, or at least, I couldn't see him. My heart pounded as I wondered, how did he know I wasn't in Miami? I decided not to reply. What else could I even say? But the night wasn't over. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I got home, exhausted from the evening. I had just kicked off my shoes when I heard knocks at the door. The sound was sharp and deliberate, slicing through the silence of my empty apartment. My heart sank. "Who is it?" I called out, already dreading the answer. A voice came from the other side. "It's me, Zach." I froze, my stomach flipping. I was alone. My mind raced as panic set in. Summoning whatever courage I had, I shouted through the door, "Leave now, or my dad's coming out to kick your ass." For a moment, I held my breath, waiting for his response. Nothing. The knock stopped. I immediately grabbed my phone, texting everyone I knew about what had just happened. My family, my friends, anyone who might be awake. Some told me to call the police. I promised I'd go to the station first thing in the morning, but morning hadn't come yet. As I sat in bed, wide-eyed and clutching my phone, another message from Zach lit up the screen. It was long, rambling, and filled with unhinged, creepy declarations. My stomach turned as I read it. "I'm feeling so many emotions right now after being used by you." The message spiraled into a grotesque mix of anger, obsession, and entitlement. Every word made my skin crawl. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or throw my phone across the room. After months of silence, I received what could only be described as an unsettling confession from Zach. The message was dripping with a mix of resentment and delusion. "I can't believe someone I cared about could lie to me like this. I feel hurt and angry. 2 emotions I wouldn't have expected from you. From the moment we met in chemistry class, I thought we had an undeniable connection. I mean, our chemistry was off the charts, no pun intended. But to find out you made up a fake Miami trip just to avoid spending time with me? That's cold, especially after everything I've done for you, risking my grades and my reputation to help you all semester. And don't pretend you didn't look at me that way sometimes. There was definitely something there. All I'm asking for is one date. I'm not proposing marriage, though. Let's be honest. I'd make an excellent husband, wouldn't I? I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe you just need more time to realize what an incredible opportunity you have in me. Way better than the losers you hang around with on campus. I'm even willing to come over so we can discuss this face to face. I'll only make this offer once. After everything, I deserve at least that much. The message ended with an ominous signature. Yours truly, Zach. I couldn't keep this to myself. At 3 a.m., I forwarded the message to everyone I knew. I didn't care how late it was, I was terrified. My hands shook as I called my dad, begging him to pick up. When he finally did, I read the message aloud, my voice trembling. My dad wasn't one to take things lightly. After reading the text, he sent Zach a fiery reply of his own. Then he called him. Once, twice, 10 times. But Zach the coward never answered. The next day, I went straight to the police. I showed them the messages and told them I wanted to press charges. They assured me Zach would be contacted and brought in for questioning. But Zach, true to form, ignored every call and text from law enforcement. It was as if he'd vanished off the face of the earth. Between my dad's threatening messages and the looming police involvement, I can only imagine Zach was hiding somewhere, scared out of his mind. I never saw him on campus again, and thankfully, he never tried to contact me after that night. Looking back, I realize how lucky I am that the situation didn't escalate further. But now I know firsthand what it feels like to be stalked by someone who doesn't understand boundaries, a fear that stays with you long after they're gone.